everyone. Good morning, and today joining me on the podcast is Stuart Guest, and I'm wondering if you can guess where Stuart is from when he starts speaking. But just by way of introduction, Stuart is the head teacher of a primary school. He's a parent and he's an adopter, and he's absolutely passionate about attachment awareness in schools. So good morning, Stuart.
Good morning, how are you doing?
I'm very, very well. So let's see, shall we play Guess the Accent? What have you been doing over the summer holidays?
Oh, crazy busy summer holidays. Just nice to spend lots of time with the family and my wonderful wife. Lots of theme parks, lots of days out, National Trust, things like that. Just lots and lots of quality time with the family.
Oh, that's lovely. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? You know, having that space and that time with the people that we love. I don't know if you can hear a little whimpering in the background, but I'm looking after my next door neighbour's doggy, who assured me would not bark. So I'm trusting.
Animals and children.
Animals and children, absolutely. So she's down here whimpering, of course.
Oh, bless.
So where we met, my memory of you was sharing the floor at a conference in Birmingham, which is where you are from.
Yeah.
And my memory of you was just this kind of high energy, kind of quite slightly bonkers sort of teacher type, flossing for the audience.
Yes, I did floss, yes. You've got to keep it down with the kids. You can't be working in a primary school and not know how to floss, really.
I thought it was ace, and it was so lovely to meet you. And I think why you're here today really is because we both share this absolute passion for attachment awareness in schools, and spend, along with being a head teacher, you spend a lot of time, as I do, working around schools, keynoting, talking to other schools about how best to do that. So what led you to, what was going on for you that brought you to that place where you wanted to really make sure that your school was attachment aware? You've got the Timpson Award for attachment awareness in your school. What does that journey look like to take you from Stuart, I want to be a teacher, to actually I want to make a real difference?
What a deep, long question to answer. I think I always wanted to be a head teacher ever since I started teaching, because I felt I wanted to make a difference to more and more children. So I think that's a sort of a lifelong journey really on that. But I think the main difference happened is when we adopted our children. Because you realise a lot of the approaches that you did with children, you had as a leader in school, were very traditional. It's like, we've always done this, therefore we always will do this, in terms of rewards, sanctions, incentives, all those types of things. And just our approach with children. We're in charge, you need to get on with it. And when I took over at a Colborne, realised actually those approaches didn't feel right, but I didn't really know why they didn't feel right. And then once we adopted our children, we realised the traditional parenting approach doesn't quite work with these children. And obviously through other learning, through assessment and through continual reading, you learn different approaches that are great for children with attachment difficulties or trauma in their lives, but actually are great for all children, because it's based on relationships and trust and empathy and compassion. And all of those things are vital for all children to thrive and succeed in schools. So we started looking at different approaches in our school and really reviewing everything that we were doing. Thinking, actually, what does this look like for a child? What does this look like for a child that might have trauma in their lives? And what does it say to them about us as a school and the relationship we have with them? So we started changing things over many, many years, policies and procedures, but also really upskilling staff in their knowledge about what it means, because you can't be putting policies and procedures in place without a decent understanding of why this is happening and why it's important.
And I think that's always such a key message for me, and I do think on that journey that we've travelled, because you'll know that even a few years ago, having these conversations was actually really difficult, and we have moved a distance.
Huge amount.
Yeah, because there was a point where, you know, I'm not saying this is gone, right? But there was a point where we were still having conversations that might look like we don't have any children in care in our school, so it's not a problem.
Yeah.
We've only got one little adopted boy. Yes, he's in year 3. Yes, we could actually have a conversation about how best to deal with him. And there was still very much this idea that it was about very particular, specific children, which of course they are the driver usually.
Yeah.
But it's that knowledge and understanding that actually, when we break this down, what we do know is that this works for everybody.
Yeah, and I think that's where, when I first started talking to schools, and like at the Adoption UK conference, it was very much about supporting adopted children in schools. But very quickly, I realised if we want to really get the support for those children, we have to broaden the conversation to adversity and adverse childhood experiences, because, you know, you're talking a lot more children than in your schools. So if you want change in those schools, you've got to broaden it out. You can't be just talking about 1 or 2 children, because you won't always get the desired impact and the desired change that you need for those children.
Yeah, and on top of that, if we're thinking about creating communities that can affect society rather than society affecting schools, then surely the children who don't have those experiences, learning about inclusion, connection, and cooperation can only be a winner for the community that school's in, that can then ripple out across into other aspects of society.
Absolutely. I think the understanding of ACEs and trauma and all that needs to be so much more mainstream through the media, and, you know, the work that we're doing as well, but also through television and things like that, because only through that broad understanding through the whole community will you get a bit more of acceptance. When a child's having a breakdown in the street, you don't get those looking eyes and those judgments. You know, so then people might think, oh, I wonder what's going on with them. You know, that bit of that care and compassion that we need. Yes, we all judge when we see things, but actually, if we can put that little seed into people's minds of compassion, okay, let's pause. Obviously, then something's going on with them, so let's not judge.
Yeah, and when I spoke with another interviewee on the podcast, we were talking about that reflection between society and education and society, you know, which informs which. Our schools, because we do still have very punitive schools and schools that don't want to respond in this way of connection and collaboration and connection, and actually go straight in for disconnection, and have behaviour policies that leave teachers with very little options in terms of dealing with distress, really. You know, one go at this and, you know, well, you know, it's in the behaviour policy, that's it, the end. So schools have a real opportunity to either be the community they're living in, or to shape in some way the community that they're living in. And I guess that's part of what you've really been working on.
Absolutely. You've got to get, you know, from a school point of view, the parents need to understand your philosophy and what you're doing, you know, and we do that through when we have parent meetings. We have a regular termly parent meeting with as many parents as want to come, you know, and in those times we continue to state our ethos and how we do things through our induction meetings with our new parents. You know, it's constantly saying, you know, we know some children will have difficulties, but we're here to support you and them. You know, and you have to understand that coming to this school, this is how we do things. You know, and I've got such buy-in. I mean, I've been at school since 2005. So, you know, it's 14 odd years now. So we've got a really good buy-in with the community. And that's so important, because when you're having to deal with their child that's been hurt or something that's happened, you know, they don't want that to happen, and nor do we. But they understand our approach in making it better in the long term.
Mm.
This is a long-term game for a lot of children. It can take 2, 3, 4, 5 lifetime to get true impact.
Yeah, and I think that's what's one of the things that certainly comes up about parents, because often it's parents that want the more punitive approaches as well, that schools talk about how difficult that is. I mean, is that something that you've had to sort of deal with?
I think it is, but you've got to keep your back against the wall in terms of what your approach is. We will not do a particular approach because we need to be seen to be doing this. That's no. What is it for this child that is needed to be done? What support is in place? And I think that's the thing. We're dealing with behaviour, particularly. It's so easy to go down the line of, well, the child has done this. But actually what we try to do here at school is like, okay, if that was the situation, what was going on around that situation? What happened before? How did people speak to it? Was there enough supervision? Should that child have been in that situation? And that's not about blame. That's just looking about improving the chances for that child to succeed in the future. But I suppose when you're constantly reflective when things happen, that's the way you get gradual improvement throughout all aspects.
And that reflection is so important, not least because it's not integral to teacher training. So unlike social work training, for example, where reflection is such an important aspect of working with the people that you're working with, teaching, and the same with supervision, teaching does not have supervision and reflection as part of its cultural makeup. So what does that journey look like in terms of supporting people who are looking at doing things that were just really, even 3 years ago, were just not seen as hand in hand aspects of teaching and practice and theory. They just did not kind of come together.
I think it is changing. I think teachers are a lot more aware that they need to sort the relationships out. It's not just about teaching in that classroom for that particular lesson and then moving on. It is about the care and guidance now. And we get that more now in the new Ofsted framework, that they're looking at that in more detail. But also, I think there's still a gap in initial teacher training. 18 months ago, I did a final lecture for some final teaching students. It was their final lecture on attachment and trauma, but that was the first time they'd heard it at university, just before they were going off into schools.
Wow.
So, some do it well, and obviously some other universities and teacher trainers don't, but that has to be there. That basic knowledge has to be there before they're confronted with these children in the classrooms. Because if they're walking into a school that don't have that ethos as well, we're really setting up those teachers not with the right skills to best support those children. So there's still a journey to go. It's getting there. As you've said, the more conversations that are had, and there's more and more people out there talking about this. If you imagine Scotland, the whole ACE nation that they're trying to do, then, through the police, the civil justice system, that they're on it. And that's what we need in England. We need everyone understanding ACEs, everyone understanding trauma, so that we can all work together on this. It is a community and a whole society issue.
It really is. And I think, it's great. Let's get honest about where those gaps are. And as you say, that again is not across the spectrum. I mean, I did my master's at Oxford Brookes, and I know that their initial teacher training focuses on these things, but equally there are many universities where they don't have that focus on trauma and attachment. And I think I'm really ready to start thinking about this in a much more I don't know, in a different way, really, in terms of where are we, what if we think about the 21st century, what are the key kind of things going on in 21st century UK and 21st century living? And I would say that disconnection and division are two of the main aspects of what we're grappling with in this massive change that we're going through globally, that we're sitting in that shit, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if we are going to say, well, disconnection and division are the key aspects that we're grappling with in 21st century living, then they surely, when we have children as much time as we do in schools, they have to be central to the mirror that we are putting up against that.
Yeah. But to do that, it does come down to your ethos in your school and where you're spending your money. But we're facing so many funding cuts, you know, and I've still managed to hold on to my 2 learning mentors and my family support worker and my assistant head who's in charge of inclusion. You know, I mean, that's a team in quite a small school, really, you know, compared to others that don't have that. Because if we don't get that right for those children and families, actually you can stuff their results because they're not going to transfer. They're not going to get there. You know, so depending on what ethos you have, if you've got a results-driven ethos, then you need to put the pastoral support in to get your results.
Absolutely. And were you cleaning toilets this summer? Because I've spoken to 2 head teachers, one of whom was cleaning the toilets because she wanted her maintenance staff to have time off and she couldn't afford to replace them. And the other head teacher had rallied around the community, and it was all the parents had come in and done the painting and the decorating and the gardens.
It's absolutely crazy. I mean, we've gone to 4.5 days. So our children aren't here on a Friday afternoon because it was either that or you start thinking about where you're cutting your staff.
Yeah.
You know, it is in a dire situation currently in schools. And I can see that when we saw it with the closing of some of the children's centres and some of the early help. You know, schools now are doing a lot more early help work and social work type things. You know, and if they're not doing that because they can't afford to or they haven't got the skills, those children and families are falling through the net, and they will become a problem for society because they're just not getting the help they need at the right time.
Well, they fill up the adult services and the children's services, and there's no need for it. There's no need for it. I mean, the cost implication. I spoke to a head of children's services the other week, and she said, "Do you know what? I was so close in a meeting to just saying, listen, if we give that family £35,000, I know they can do it, rather than take that child into care."
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Rather than take that child into care, if we put that money into that family, you know, I know they can do it.
Yeah, and you imagine how much the care costs.
Yeah.
You know, it's just not seen, is it? That forward thinking and getting that prevention, getting it right early on. No.
So what is it that you do in your school? I mean, one of the things I do know about schools is they like lots and lots of, when people are listening to the podcast or they come to the training, you know, that, tell me about the trauma stuff. Tell me about the ACEs. Right, now, what do I do? I've got these children in front of me. What do I do? What do the policies and procedures look like? Tell me now so I can crack on. So what do you then, what goes on in your school on that journey that you've taken?
Yeah. It's not hugely complicated. And I think that's the key message, really. One, it's getting the knowledge for the staff so they understand it, as I've said. Yes, it's then your policies and procedures. So it's everything from simple things like in our achievements assemblies, a teacher won't say something like, oh, they've done really well, they've moved up to blue colour in their reading, or whatever it might be. Because what that actually says to every other child who's not that in that year group is you're not as good. It's that self-esteem thing. So it's just, you know, they can say they've moved up a reading group because everyone can move up a reading group, or everyone can, you know, things like that. So it's subtleties, you know, it's subtlety, but it's very clear in policy what you do and don't do. You know, reading out test scores in classes, you know, having your test scores on the wall, you know, having the silly, happy, sad side faces, zone boards in the classrooms for behaviour.
Oh, God, and clouds.
Visual. Oh, clouds, what a nightmare. Thunder and lightning, then you get a rainbow. You know, come on. You know, what I say into my training, you know, you've just done, say, a round of observations for your teachers. You know, so you go into the staff meeting, you go, all right, Mr. Jones, that was shit. So there you go. You're going down on the board in the staff room. You don't do that. You don't do that to adults. So why on earth do we do it to children? Where you can just have that quiet word with them. You know, you don't have to deal with things straight away as well. So if there's been a bit of a disruption, you know, you can get to the end of a lesson, you know, and you can talk to that child, you know, and say, do you know what, I can see something was going on here. I'm wondering if it's this. It's that whole curiosity, you know, and try to deal with it. Because actually, if you just go for the punitive, what happens is they get peed off with you. You know, the barrier's shut down and you've lost the relationship, and you've got those kids for 39 weeks. So if you do that early doors, it's not going to happen. So I think, so those sort of policies and procedures, but it's also how we deal with children. So if a child had difficulty or something's gone on, we'll come and talk to them. You know, I'm sitting in our inclusion hub at the moment. You know, this is where we've got a dedicated room where we can have those conversations with children and come up with a plan together. Okay, how are we going to get this to be better than it is now for you, for us, for your learning? So all of those things. But then it's the whole, the provision and practice. You know, it's what it looks like in terms of the curriculum. Are we teaching children about emotional regulation? Are we talking to them about their brain? You know, through assemblies? Are we doing stories that reflect characters that are regulating their emotions or dealing with difficult situations? So it's all of that element. None of it on its own is difficult, but it's making sure that you're reflecting on all the different aspects of school and thinking, okay, what does this look like for these children? And making sure it's best they can. But that's as a whole school level. On a classroom level, I think I call it sort of 4 R's really. One is relationships. You've got to build those early doors, particularly at the start of the school year where we're nearly at now. Then it's routines. Okay, what are those clear routines you're going to have in your classroom? So what happens on a Monday morning when children come in? What happens on a Tuesday morning when the children come in? What happens just before break, just before dinner? All of those things, which is great for all children, but particularly for children with trauma or attachment difficulties, that knowledge of what's going to happen now, next, later, then all that, if it's clear, then they're going to be less stressed. And then with less stress, then their behaviour will be better and they'll be more regulated and more able to learn. So that's the sort of that. And then rituals. What are those nice little rituals that teachers can do with their children? You know, what's the greeting ritual? Is there a song at the end of the day? Is there a high, whatever it might be? You know, teachers are amazing at coming up with those rituals, but they're important because they build connection and the relationship with that teacher and with other children if they're doing it together. You know, so that's really important. Yeah. And then finally, the 4th R is the recognition. You know, spotting when a child's done well and letting them know specifically that. You know, and that's not necessarily about a whole massive bells and whistles in front of the whole class, because for some kids that's just a big no-no. That will take them over the edge. But, you know, recognising, you know, I've noticed that you've tried so hard in that lesson. You know, good job. You know, that type of idea. You know, you notice when I said that is that you've tried, you've worked really hard. Not the outcome is really high. You know, because it's always got to be about that effort and reaching and that personal best. Because if kids can recognise that their personal best can be improved, then actually they're onto that whole growth mindset concept and will continue to strive to do better.
Yeah. And I mean, that just sort of leaves me thinking about, because you'll have been in schools and I've been in schools where you do whole school training and there are people within the team, within that school, who are not happy to reflect and not comfortable with being curious and don't have an awareness that really supports what you've just talked about, which is actually a lot of emotional intelligence.
Yes, yeah.
And that's a really difficult journey to take people on. You know, when perhaps they've got their own traumas going on and they've got, you know, their own backstory. I mean, I certainly try and, you know, I always come in with my backstory because I think it's important to open up that space for the fact that we all have an attachment story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we all bring ourselves to that party, you know. But I think it must be very difficult as a senior leader, you know, when you've made that decision about you're going to take people on that journey. And I've seen it done quite brutally and I've seen it done very gently and slowly. You know, how do you gently take that staff team? Because even even, you know, you've been at your school a long time, so you know what you're looking for when you do your recruitment. You know what needs to come into your school. But when you take over a school, you're often taking over a whole range of things that perhaps are very misaligned to the values that you want to have in your school. I mean, what's your advice there if somebody does want to do that and has, you know, has staff that are really struggling with?
Yeah, I think likewise, when you have strong relationships with the children, it's important to have those strong relationships and mutual trust with the staff. So once they've got the knowledge and they understand where you're coming from, but they're still not quite getting it, that's where your coaching comes in, and necessarily your supervision, but if they've got their own issues. And often it will be the reason they're not going there is because of their own underlying issues. So they've got to be supported as well. But ultimately, if they're not meeting the expectations and the values that you have in your school, then ultimately the school isn't the right place for them. Another school might be perfectly fine, you know, but you've got to give them an opportunity through support and mentoring and coaching and supervision, etc., to try to get there. But I've always said this: the children then become the priority. You can give some time to staff to help them on that journey, but ultimately, if they're not getting there with the right support and in a compassionate and caring way, then actually they do need to move on, because it's the children on a day-to-day basis that will suffer ultimately.
And I think, you know, I'm quite harsh really, where I sort of think, you know, if you don't want to sort out your stuff, then you don't really deserve to work with children. You know, working with children is actually, there's a responsibility to deal with your stuff. But having said that, if I think about myself as a practitioner in my 20s, you know, where I was at in dealing with my stuff, you know, I'm fine. You know, I know that I've got some stuff, you know, I've been working through this bit and that bit, but actually the real nub of it, I didn't get to until I was 40. I just did not get the layers of the onion did just not unpick until that point. And I guess that's the way it's meant to be. But I do wonder if I'd had those things in place, you know, that we would expect now, which is that coaching, mentoring, supervision, and somebody being compassionate about our story, because that's the big fear, isn't it? That if I tell you who I am and what's going on for me, if I haven't dealt with that, there is still shame. So there's still going to be that shame element. So every time I'm dealing with a child who has the same issues, we're triggering each other's shame story.
Absolutely. But I think it comes down to a relationship you have with your staff, isn't it? You know, if you are open and you are honest about, do you know what, we don't always get things wrong, you know, and if things go wrong, it's okay, come and talk to us. We can always sort things out. And I think if you've got that ethos with your staff, then it's okay, because they're more willing to come forward and say, I'm struggling here, or I got this wrong. And they know that you're not going to get, what on earth did you do that for? You're not going to get that here. You're going to get, okay, come on, let's have a chat about it. You know, and I, you know, over the years here, teachers have come into my office and said, oh, Stuart, I've done this. And I go, okay, come on, let's sort this out. And it's that approach. And if you haven't got that, if you've got those type of heads that you're scared to approach, or you think you're going to get into trouble, then you're going to struggle making proper change for the staff.
And what I'm hearing there is that these kind of changes, they're top down.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I do schools training, you know, one of the first questions I ask, because it's usually an assistant head or a Senko that's contacting me for the training, I would say, is the head going to be present? And if the answer is no, then I won't do the training, because if schools want to make a change, the heads or the governors have to be present.
Yeah, and that's where I definitely got to about a year and a half ago. In fact, I want to have a phone call with everyone. I want to know your mission. I want to know your values, because it was after standing in front of a school where the senior leadership team had all walked out and gone to a meeting, apart from one sitting at the back who looked like a police officer. And then all the rest of the staff didn't engage with me at all and were sat there with their arms crossed, and it was just awful. And I just thought, there are so many other things going on here.
Yeah.
that I cannot get past, and start talking to these people who look traumatized themselves,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, about developing a trauma-informed approach in the school. And that was such a good turning point for me in that regard, because I just hadn't, that penny just hadn't really dropped, because I was just going into lots of schools. You know, you learning on the go, aren't you? You know.
Of course you do, absolutely.
Yeah. So what about leaving the listener with some key kind of tips for moving forward, or changes that you've seen, or how it worked with your own adopted children? You know, just something that people can ponder and think about, that they might be able to do some small changes, whether in their school or whether with their adopted children, whatever our audience are listening to you for. What would you like to leave them with, really?
I think you sort of touched on it. Deal with your own triggers and your own traumas, because we have all got them. We've all got things that really trigger us. And I've had to really learn that for myself personally as a dad, but also as a leader. Once you've acknowledged those, you've called those out for what they are, then next time those things happen, you're less likely to react at an emotional level to those. So you can be a bit more calm and controlled. And I think that would be, for me, the biggest thing. Really understand yourself. And when you've got yourself hot and bothered in a situation, go back to that. Think, okay, what was it that really got on my nerves there? What was it that really triggered me? And what am I going to do differently? And if you constantly can reflect on that as a parent, as a teacher, as a leader, then actually doing that over and over again will overall improve your personal well-being, but also the outcomes for the people in front of you. That's
a beautiful message to end on. And are you excited to be going back to school?
Absolutely. I was saying this to some people this weekend, actually. I was at a theme park with some friends and the family, and they said, oh, you've only got a week left and all this. I said, do you know what? That's absolutely fine, because I absolutely love being at home with my family, and I absolutely love being at school. So for me, it's like, it's great. So it's no bother either way. I am excited about the new school year. We've got a couple of new staff. We've got a new nursery. So we've got lots of new things coming. Yeah, I always enjoy the first. Always feel nervous though. I still haven't lost that first day nerves, and like greeting the children, the parents, and the staff, and the first key messages you're going to give. Always still nervous, but great. I love my job, and I feel very fortunate that I've got a great family and I've got a great job. So, and I can do these things like that I've just done with you.
Oh, that's lovely. And I wonder if when we stop feeling nervous, that's when it's time to throw the towel in, because that nervousness means we are still rocking up every day with that deep passion and that excitement, and we want to really make a difference. And I love that. What's not to love about that?
Absolutely.
Stuart, thank you so much. You have a wonderful day, and I will speak with you really soon.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.